This will be a sensitive conversation for people who are conservative and aren't comfortable talking about caste, but it's an important conversation, and the book is an absolute must read for anyone who is interested in it. I have always been a big fan of Ravikant Kisana and his great podcast, Buffalo Intellectual Podcast. I've been listening to it for many years and I've been saving it for myself. But now that he has written a book and has quote unquote gone mainstream, I just had to read the book and talk about it. So the book is called Meet the Savarnas. You can see the inspiration in his writing style from Babasaheb Ambedkar. Well, book reading and book culture is still alive and thriving in the Ambedkarite circles, and I've always longed for someone to not copy, but let's say take inspiration from his style and talk about social issues with an understanding and lens that only comes from experience. And I'm happy to say that Ravikant has done a great job in articulating his unique perspective in this book. I read Waiting for a Visa by Ambedkar a while back, and ever since I've always wanted to read something similar. And the few many stories in this book also, at least the lessons that you can draw from them are somewhat similar, I would say. So really, it just felt like a fresh breath of air, and it's almost like the second coming of Ambedkar after reading this book. Very enjoyable. The book talks about elite Savarnas, their hopes, dreams, aspirations, their thought processes, and also, more obviously, the hypocrisy in their actions and privilege they take for granted, their failings, their shortcomings, how caste seeps into their everyday lives. And being an elite Savarna myself, some of these points hit too close to home. Well, I wouldn't say it's an eye opener or anything because I'm pretty aware of the privilege and networking and gatekeeping that I have that most of the Indian population doesn't. And I'm pretty aware of all of that and the conversation surrounding it. Like I said, I've been a fan of the podcast for a while now, but Ravikant has done a great job in articulating the life of the person below the glass floor, as he puts it, in the analogy derived from the feminism viewpoint. And again, what a brilliant analogy to help us realize that we are not living the same lives. We talk of equality and not discriminating people based on caste, religion, etc. But that is exactly what we do. And when someone articulates it in such a brilliant way, it does something to you. You can't shake it off anymore. Especially when you consider that more than 70% of the population, Indian population, is not the Savarna population. It is SCs, STs, and OBCs, or they fall into some other category. But when so much of the power and resources are accumulated in this very small percentage of society, it will crack sooner or later. And he makes the point that we had a dream, the Savarna, well, liberal Savarna, let's say, population of the 90s and 2000s had a dream India will become a superpower by 2020, something like that. The corporate liberalization of 1990 will bring India to the world map, make a name for itself, and such. But the date has been slowly pushed away from 2020 to 2047 now of Viksit Bharat, and the dream is collapsing. And the book makes the case for taking stock of our situation, realizing that the systems are failing, and if we continue down this path of gatekeeping and caste-based politics, and by politics I don't mean campaigning, but the effect of caste in policy making, then we are sure to be doomed. And much like Ayn Rand, he calls for a complete break from the past. The future you deserve can be achieved if you completely reject everything that previously you stood for. And very much like Ambedkar did in his great writings on how we have to reject completely the notion of Hindu Rashtra or Manusmriti, very similar to his thought process on how we have to completely reject all of this and start fresh. Only then can we see some positive change long after we are all gone. Maybe. The timing is of the book is also very interesting, because right now the Hindutva narrative is at its peak, and a lot of people are calling it out for the narrative that has been spread doesn't match with the facts. There are some other great books. I was reading one by Manu Joseph, uh, why the poor don't kill the rich, something like that. There's Akar Patel's book also that again has a lot of facts and graphs and such that would explain the same points in a different way, but this one has 8 chapters that tackle broadly vast different topics on how caste and elite Savarnas deal with it in their lives. These range from their corporate lives, their personal lives, their aspirations of uh, leaving India behind and emigrating to the first world. Many different topics are covered in the book. Absolutely love each one of it, but my favorite is the prologue where he explains where he comes from. Not a single word in wasted in hitting home the point that he just wants to say his piece and be left alone. Again, it's a quote that I've heard many times on the podcast, but the prologue is exquisitely written, as is the epilogue. Well done. So, I just wanted to start with a few quotes. My favorite ones were where he used pop culture to make some points, and one of them is from his analysis of DDLJ. Quote, even the most critically minded Savarna liberals will end up appeasing and bowing to the wishes of their family, despite recognizing the casteist and exclusionary nature of their objections. This is because when individuality and choice are pitted against the vast network of tangible and intangible family caste privileges, the latter, as stated before, proves too intimidating and even lucrative to give up. Thus Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge (DDLJ) remains the cornerstone of romance for many Savarna millennials because it is deeply comforting. It does not force them to choose between family, a euphemism for caste network privileges, and love, born of individual preference and choices. Instead, it makes the former a necessary precondition for the latter, so much so that it seems there is no contradiction between the two at all, despite that being the premise of the film and films of similar kind. Shah Rukh Khan cannot elope with Kajol unless her father willingly lets her go to him. His dedication to winning her father's approval against stupendous odds is proof of his love for her rather than any shared life goals or the tenderness that comes from intimacy and companionship. End quote. Very interesting how you realize that a sweet climatic moment in the movie that is so popular now with the Jile Apni Zindagi line completely breaks the premise and the purpose of the film. It essentially says that the girl can only live a happy life only if she has the approval of their parents and the boy, of course. And the message is not love triumphs all, but that you can love, but only if you have your approval from the traditions and customs you come from. And this is speaking just of a marriage or relationship between two elite Savarnas, which are SRK and Kajol in this case, when there is a member of a lower caste, quote unquote, the equation is completely different. And he goes into detail on how that affects the psyche of the male being lower caste or the female being lower caste and what they want from the relationships. All of those passages were extremely interesting. And again, the essential conclusion that is being reached is that even if you are liberal and even if you are aware of the caste privileges and differences, even though you have been taught in school that you should not discriminate, when it comes to the reality of living in this society where everything is steeped in caste, even after realizing that what you're doing is wrong, you will not break away from it because doing so, calling out discrimination, will exclude yourself from the privileges that you gain from being in that community. So you just keep your tone down, and hence the system propagates itself. Those who are benefiting keep benefiting, and those who are excluded from it are always on the sidelines. Here's a different quote that puts it brilliantly. Quote, while the progressive Savarna liberals may privately complain and grumble about their conservative relatives and friends, they will never truly create distance or meaningful separation from them. This is because such a separation would come at the cost of losing their cultural vocabulary and access to the social caste network with all its privileges. Even for the progressives, this is too much to process, making their anti-caste conservatism stance suspect to begin with. At best, what they seek is to shield themselves from directly witnessing overt and covert violence of caste bearing and the gatekeeping of marginalized communities. Thus, most Savarna liberals will cultivate a deliberate ignorance. They internalize it and emerge as innocent beings, oblivious and naive individuals who express shock only when something truly gory unfolds, such as a caste lynching, rape, or student suicide. Otherwise, they are happy with the status quo, which is built on the exploitation of the bodies and labor of the marginalized castes. End quote. And this is great commentary because you again realize that when a Hathras happens, only then do you wake up to this sudden new reality. It takes a brutal rape and murder for you to wake up to the everyday nonsense that goes on in the name of caste and all the things that are connected to it. We are already too far gone as a society if that is the case. And speaking of Hathras, he also calls out Faye D'Souza, one of my favorite, again, news producers. I follow her diligently, but I didn't know that she pandered more towards the murder and rape part, oblivious of the caste angle to it, and that after she was called out on Twitter and some other platforms, I'm assuming, that she then platformed SC and SG people for a while and then went back to her regular programming. Again, how much of it is intentional or just happens to be the case, or how much of it is a smart business decision? It's difficult to say. But again, the point I'm trying to make here is that Ravikant is very acute at observing such subtle changes in behavior of people, and there are many such instances in this book, and he calls them out one by one. There is a short section on the Ambani family wedding towards the end, if I remember, and how the family itself was sitting on a platform and the Pandit was sitting below them, something like that. Again, I had a good chuckle on that. I don't know how, for what reason this is, but somehow when he gives examples instead of talking theory, which also he does with Fanon, and how, again, it's all theoretical about how something like caste would affect a person's psyche. Instead of the theory, I connected more with the pop cultural aspects of it because I don't know why. It's hard to say. Anyway, point being that a society needs all kinds of people to for it to keep running. Even though you have a corporate job, let's say you put on your laptop bag and go to work every day, but the sanitation workers in that IT park are not upper caste. They are obviously Bahujans. They work as, again, sanitation workers and cleaners and maintenance staff, let's say, security. All of these people only an so again, here's another quote, for example, quote, only an exclusionary system like Brahmanism, which is built on obfuscating and dehumanizing service labor, could normalize the utter lack of human sensitivity in corporate India today, end quote. So you have to realize that when you talk of merit, not all of you are starting from the same level. You have been born into privilege, and the lower caste people have a much bigger leap to take before they even get to the starting level of your what you consider a starting job. And again, all of this is very well known outside of this book also, but it's just good that he documents it in such meticulous ways. Let us look at my notes very quickly and see if I have anything else to say about it. Actions versus morals, gatekeeping, perception versus reality. Yeah, I loved how he recognizes the sob story that every Savarna has, where they always started off very poor and without any resources and worked their way up. Again, when you realize that the vast majority of people, more than 70% of the population, had it way worse, you again then realize that you have no reason to complain at all when you read about their hardship, where getting to the first paycheck itself is such a huge deal for an entire community. If someone from the lower caste makes it, you would stop whining about your struggles as a young Savarna. And again, Mayavati has to be mentioned in this context, that you can argue many different things. It's not right that she put up her statues next to, I don't know, elephants and other greats. I don't know what the exact case was, but whatever the criticism that people have of Mayavati, you cannot deny that coming from such a backward, underprivileged society, for a female untouchable to rise to the level that she did is an incredible feat. And instead of appreciating someone for doing that or being able to do that, you just call them uneducated And the same conversation is happening today with Lalu Prasad Yadav's rule of Bihar with the Jungle Raj argument. But again, it is clear that he was a necessity of the time. And again, for someone to rise to such levels in a state that is so poor, it says something about the society that people are living in. And what is that? Are you able to articulate it? Do you always need an elite Savarna figure to praise? Can you also do it for people who are not from your bubble? Very interesting. Okay, let's see what else we have. Oh, Manusmriti. Every time I look at that name, I just cannot. It's shameful that a document such as that came through all these years of culture from Hindu traditions in India. And it's even more shameful that people today still hold it up as the real, true constitution that should be followed instead of the actual constitution that, again, obviously borrows from British and American constitutions that came before it. But any work of literature does that. It builds on previously established rules, let's say. At least the ideas are same. But again, the exclusionary nature of Manusmriti is something that is not called out enough. What else do we have? Thoughts on, okay, we did this, laziness and favoritism. Well, again, this is obvious. When you're looking for a person to hire, at least in tier 2 cities, let's say, where the prevalence of caste is much higher, you realize that you would give the job to someone whom you know, which is more often than not someone from your own community and caste, and hence the cycle propagates itself. I briefly talked about the globalization in 1991 that benefits only the businessmen of the time, which again propagates to today. I think the main thing to realize was that even though Manmohan Singh did what he did to the best of his ability, and maybe the Indian society would have gone the USSR way if that hadn't happened, although this was right after the collapse of the Soviet era, so there are learnings to be made there, but still, bringing in such change in such a poor society at the time would have been difficult. But still, when that happens and you invite all the multinational companies and corporates to pump money into to buy land, for example, let's say, and to build industry, who do you think would benefit from that? Is it the millions and millions of poor people? No, it would go to people who already supported the British Empire at the time. Well, at least from up until 1997, it's not like Indian businesses didn't exist. Many of these companies worked hand in hand with the East India Company at the time to exploit again cheap labor, which the companies of today still do with Blinkit and Zepto, for example. So when you allow corporate to buy up all of the land and industry, only the top 10%, let's say, benefited from it. And the spoils of that war were distributed among that community alone and not to any of the classes under them. What else do we have? Oh, yeah, every time someone brings up the merit argument, again, I just cannot with them. The playing field is not level at all. Again, I could go into a long rant on merit, but I'm trying to keep this review short. Let's see what else I have. Elite sheltered from the blatant oppressive regimes and structural inequalities. This is a point, again, it's not new in any way, but not having an inclusionary society harms only you, not the people who are below the glass floor. This is because the restrictions are on you. As a Brahmin, you cannot touch this, you cannot go there, you cannot do this. So it is obviously a direct attack on the freedom of people. And why does it hurt you? Because you still need people of all kinds in your life for a society to function. And you again would see the ramifications of this in your daily life, where you see that, let's say, someone refuses to eat food that is made by someone of a lower caste. Well, too bad, the upper caste people are busy making money. So you have to do it yourself if you aren't okay with that. So with time, it will change, it has to change, and it will be the better thing than the exclusionary nature of your current society. Moral policing versus safe space in Savarna. Oh, how brilliantly written this particular chapter was, where he talks about the family being a place where you are not encouraged to share your beliefs, but more of the moral policing goes on there. It's not a safe space at all where you can share what you feel. It is always judged, and then you are also given feedback on what to do that will again bring you back to quote unquote our culture, that again is so brilliant that it excludes people from other castes, where you again segregate people based on gender. Let's say a female cannot do this, or again the example, classic example that he also mentions in the book is how women cannot enter the mandir area when they are on their periods. Again, a lot of conversation has already taken place on this topic elsewhere, so I wouldn't repeat all of that, but make it make sense. Ah, anyway, moving on to uh, the next thing that I have here on marriage, variable back. Oh yeah, so he says that every elite Savarna has this rebel phase, and again I can relate to this. I've talked about this in some previous videos also, where maybe in your teenage years, let's say, you are exposed more to the liberal side of things. You're all for individual freedom and rights, for lack of a better word. And he says that when this phase ends, you again, because life gets tough as you get older, it's all downhill again, obviously. And when that happens, you again fall back to your original traditions that have been propagated through time. You, even if you try, cannot stick to the liberal and individual rights stands that you took as a younger man, because you almost gave up, you gave in, and you again go back to tradition. So again, interesting observation, but I was just wondering, what alternative is there? When you get older, how far should you go to stand on your feet and make your point? And can you argue endlessly about your beliefs with people who don't agree with you? If you do that, you again face the brunt of that, which is exclusion from that community and society. So you again, because the profits outweigh the moral stand that you are taking, you go back to tradition. Very interesting. I still don't know how to deal with this because I am exactly in this phase right now. Anyway, let's move on. Success for elite Savarnas in love. Interesting observations again. For men, it is not love or companionship, but it is more of fulfilling a duty, having a tick next to that checkbox, which again, I don't think is the right reason you marry someone, but yeah, that is an interesting observation again. And for women, on the other hand, when elite women, Savarna women marry, it again is more for the purposes of independence. People won't ask them again on when you're getting married in family functions, or you're the next in line, quote unquote. having then the freedom to do what they want and transcendence. To cap it all off, let's just say that this current system is self serving. The results of it aren't what they were originally projected to be, and you have to realize that segregating society based on caste is part of the problem, right? So when you realize that, then you can take measures on how to go in a different direction from now, at least, or else India will join the company of Pakistan and Bangladesh, where most of the country's elites have left the country with very little resources left in the country itself, and only the poor people, so to say, are left behind. Those who have money and power have already left the country. In India, that still hasn't happened. Well, at least not to the extent that it has in Pakistan and Bangladesh. We are the same people. There is precedence. So it will be interesting to see how the next few decades span out. So thank you, Ravikant, for writing this book. Enjoyed it thoroughly, and I would recommend it to anyone who is interested in this topic. And thank you all for listening to this. Bye.